Cool. Well, why don't we go ahead and get started? I'm Caitlin. I'm one of the admins at Locally Optimistic, and all I really do is facilitate these conversations. So I'm gonna hand it off to Sean Lynch from Census to kind of give us a little walkthrough.
Hi, everybody. My name's Sean. Caitlin, thanks for the introduction. Everyone, thanks for letting me sneak in. I appreciate it. So let me see here. I wanted to share my screen. Can you all see that? Any like nod or thumbs up? Awesome. Okay. So my plan today is to give you a little intro on myself. I want to walk through Census and why we exist. And then I really just want to cut to the demo. So I want to show you how you use Census, where we plug into your stack, and kind of give you an intro from that perspective, actually with pixels as opposed to slides, and then any sort of Q&A afterwards. So like I said, I've heard a lot about this community. I'm really interested to get into the nitty-gritty and discussions and kind of hear what's top of mind from your perspective and what's coming up as I'm showing you some of this stuff. So as Caitlin mentioned, I am Sean. I am one of the founders of Census. I am a tools geek, so I've been working in developer platforms and SaaS and cloud infrastructure for the last decade at companies like Google and Dropbox. And I am Canadian, which I hope you will excuse the next slide. And if I drop any A's or anything like that, you just understand where that's coming from. So yes, as I mentioned, Canadian. This is my pithy explanation for why Census exists. Our whole goal, our reason for existence has been to put your data on offense, to actually make your data useful to drive business value. And let's see if this sounds familiar to you. I know there's a lot of folks that are interested, and I think from this community, this is probably going to resonate more than most of the times that we talk about Census. But the world that we found, and with a lot of our existing customers, looks a lot like this, right? I think we've all sort of heard the pitch on a data warehouse at this point, this idea that you should put all of your data in one spot. If you want to do analysis, you want to enable reporting, that's great. But a lot of those insights kind of get stuck in the data side of the world. It's one thing for it to exist as an answer, but it's a whole nother thing to actually get that to the folks on the front lines working with customers. And that's, in a nutshell, like if you zone up for the rest of the call, that's our pitch on Census. We really want to make it easy to leverage that data warehouse, to have all your data in one spot, but to use it to drive business processes, right? And today, if you're trying to do something like that yourself, you're likely going to end up in a world that looks kind of like this. You end up with sort of this point-to-point integration spaghetti code of things passing to other things, APIs being called from some custom code, maybe an event here or there being passed, some manual uploads, that sort of thing. And it becomes a kind of nightmarish melange of all of these different types of integrations, partly because you've got away from that real value that the data warehouse is supposed to provide, right? That idea that there's a single source of truth, that everything sort of runs through one spot, and you can kind of build that one place that you can understands all of your business. So that's still the first step from our perspective. Deploying the data warehouse is the right thing, and thankfully that's uncontroversial at this point. Like the rapid growth of Snowflake and what we've seen with Redshift, what's going on with Fivetran and that sort of thing. Everybody seems to be on board, at least for the folks that we talk to, with this idea that there's a ton of value in aggregating all of these different data sources into one spot, so you can start building a sort of single referenceable definition of, say, a customer, or what the business looks like, analytics, etc. But our whole pitch at Census is to take that kind of multi-spoke model pushing into the hub and expand it to the other side. So it's not just getting data into the data warehouse, it's getting data out of the data warehouse as well, being able to use all of those shared models, all of those insights you're building in the data warehouse to drive these various different teams. So that's Census in a nutshell. Our pitch is we'll plug into that data warehouse ecosystem that you're already building, you're already leveraging, that hopefully we're not creating or suggesting something new there, but we're going to give you a set of tools that ultimately allow all of those other folks on the team, you know, sales operations, business operations, that sort of thing, to actually take that same data and drive marketing campaigns with it, or set up sales motion and that sort of thing. So that's where we fit. We're sort of in this, the right side of this hub and spoke model. And what I want to do is show you a little bit of what the process is to set up some of those connectors on Census. And as part of this, I'm going to show our brand new dbt integration. We love dbt at Census. We actually discovered it organically from our customers who are doing really amazing things with it, and really thought, yes, this is the right way to start aggregating this data together in a manageable way. So I'm going to show the dbt integration, and I'll show you dbt. But I will point out before we get into it that you're not obligated to use this. So if you're using Dataform, or if you're using other tools to do modeling, you've built your own models in the past, all of that is fine. We plug directly into your data warehouse. We can consume tables and views, whatever you need. So with that, I'll jump in, and I'm going to show you kind of a pattern of dbt we see over and over again, that sort of standardizing for a lot of teams. So for those of you who are not familiar with dbt, it stands for Data Build Tool, and it's really a really simple but powerful abstraction on top of SQL that give you the ability to kind of take, you know, those giant SQL models that are 500 lines and various different subqueries and lists and that sort of thing, and break it up into much more manageable chunks. So it becomes easy to like understand what's going on and tweak and potentially add conditions in a or much more manageable, scalable way, so that teams collaborating on these models over time are not just overwhelmed with, oh, I can't imagine what that model is doing anymore. It's too scary. There's too many like weird wheres. I don't want to deal with it. So what we've got here for our dbt demo is a fake SaaS company we call Marker. It's a mural whiteboard type of app. And so when we start getting into it, you're going to see things like metrics about sharing, about adding images, creating new canvases, that sort of thing. And what I've got in terms of my dbt project here, we like to call the sort of layer cake, but usually we see projects having 3 different layers. One is raw, which you'll see as sources. That's a built-in dbt function, but that's really anything that's coming out of like your Fivetran or Segment, or that you're putting into your data warehouse. This is the raw form of the data sitting in your data warehouse. The second layer is what we call core here. And that tends to be the place where you on the data team side, or the data team side, starts doing some of the basic cleanup, right? That might be pulling things, JSON out into fields, or fixing types, or removing, you know, where is deleted equals true, all that sort of stuff. So you're starting to clarify what the different sort of chunks of functionality are. And so I've got this one here where I'm pulling some events, and I'm actually associating that by team, and I'm getting some user counts and when was the first event and last event. I've got some other metrics here that I'm pulling out of JSON, and I've got a sort of basic qualified definition here, which is, are they VIP? Do they have more than 10 users? But you can imagine if you wanted to change the definition of VIP, you can come on in here and just add that condition, and away you go. And then the last piece in that layer cake we talk about as being published, but these are really the end resulting models that you can actually serve to other parts of the company, right? So this is really where you want your reports to be built off, or in the Census case, where we want to take data and start pushing into those different tools. So I've got some of that data here, and really I'm just, like I said, joining a couple of those different DBT models together. I'm pulling in all of the various stats, and I've actually got one here that is using that is VIP definition that I mentioned earlier to just pull out the accounts that we consider VIP, that, you know, somebody's using the product, maybe a sales team should actually talk with them because it looks like they have a lot of users. So that's all on the DBT side of things. Like I mentioned, you don't necessarily need to use DBT, but this becomes a really nice way for you to kind of parcel apart these projects into something a little bit more manageable and useful. And on the Census side, so this is Census, and you have two main components of Census. One is your models, and one is your syncs. And on the model side, I've actually gone ahead and connected that exact same DBT project that we were just looking at on the Census side, with one little twist. So what we often see is that DBT projects end up sort of ballooning into these dozens or low hundreds of models that are all strung together to actually get those end resulting published tables. But from a Census standpoint, we really only want to expose those published models. So we've got this filtered down to just those 3 published models that we care about, including that Teams one that I was just looking at here. So I'll run it, but it's the exact same thing. It's the same data that we were looking at earlier. And I want to start pushing this into Salesforce. So the folks on the sales side, the account execs, will have some new target accounts that they can go after. I only care about the ones that are VIP. I don't want to send them every possible user that signed up for the product. I just want them to focus on the ones that have a lot of usage going on. So I'm going to set up this sync for now. So the process of creating a sync in Census is designed to be as sort of straightforward as possible, but giving you the flexibility to configure or control how it works in your destination tool. Because, you know, Salesforce is an infinitely customizable project or tool. There are a lot of different ways that you might have your particular sales workflow set up, or your use case. If you're, you know, doing something more with a 2-sided marketplace, you might have a bunch of custom objects that you want to push to instead. All of that is available to you in Census. We're just trying to make it as easy as possible, so you're not sort of writing custom API to get this done. So I'm going to connect to our Salesforce in this case, but you can see that you can hook up lots of different tools to Census along the customer journey, not just on the sales side. I'm going to push this into account. And in this case, I want to create new records, but you can control how records are created. You can only update existing ones, which is sort of more enriching objects in Salesforce. You can delete them, so Census will keep your accounts in lockstep with what's in the data warehouse. And then I'm going to tell Census that the ID column on my database is the same identifier as the company ID on the Salesforce side. And this is basically setting the primary keys on both sides of the sync. So the Census side and the Salesforce side. And it's just going to match those and use that to determine, hey, should I create a new record because it's not in there? Or if there is one in there, great, I'll just update what's there. And the next step here is just specifying which fields part of your Salesforce object actually need to be populated. In this case, we're just telling you that, hey, in order for us to create a new record according to your Salesforce, the account name is required and domain is required. So let's populate both of those. You can add whatever fields you like. You can add relationships. So if you wanted to create accounts that were specified to certain contacts, you can specify that all here. We'll come back in a minute to that. I'll show you some additional fields there, but for now, I'm going to get this sync running. And while that's running, let me give you kind of the nerdy explanation to what's going on in the background. So I mentioned right at the beginning that our whole pitch is to work well with your data warehouse, but in actual fact, we work on your data warehouse. So our entire sync algorithm is built on looking at the table, running a diff, and storing the state of that diff as part of your data warehouse. So all of your customer PII, that sort of thing, is sitting in your infrastructure, is in your data warehouse. We don't want that sitting on our servers. So we can sort of track the diffs over time as we are looking at that table change. And we are basically going and look at that table, at whatever frequency you want. In this case, it's manual, but you can schedule that as frequently as continuously, which basically means every minute or two, we're going to check your data warehouse to see if there are any changes. The benefit of that is we'll only ever send changes to the destination tool if there are changes in your data warehouse. So if your data isn't changing that frequently, that's great. But if you have, for example, like a sign up event or something like that, that you want to be really responsive to, you can set this to continuously check. And anytime there is a new sign up, we'll send that to Salesforce, but we're not pounding the quota otherwise. Our whole from the get-go sync engine has been built with this idea that we should be as thrifty on the APIs that we are using as possible and just push that data as quickly as we can. So you can schedule this. You can set this up as frequently as you want, but for now, I've got it running once. Let's take a quick look and we'll refresh Salesforce here. Should have all of the accounts that I just had in my database now created. Great, they've got an account owner set up. Somebody can go in and start selling those. Then now we've got a sync running. I can go and schedule it as I was showing. I can leave this as is, and as new records are being created in that table, they're going to start showing up in Salesforce. I don't have to do anything else, which is great. What we typically see our customers do is that they'll start with something like this. They'll start using Census with one particular use case in mind, but their use cases will evolve over time. So they'll, sales will start using this, but then say marketing is interested in doing a targeted ad campaign or starting to personalize some email, and they are interested in setting up a sync. Our whole emphasis at Census is to try and make that source of truth, that data warehouse, as useful as possible. So they can come in here and create another sync and reference that same table and start pushing that off to Marketo or to Zendesk. And that means that if you go in to DBT again and you decide to change your definition of what is VIP, right? If you extended this to add what other functions, that's also going to sync both to Salesforce, as we've set up now, but any of the other tools as well. So again, the real focus is on how do we make your data warehouse as much of the central source of truth, both in terms of data, but also in terms of business logic as possible. So just to kind of expand on that a little bit, let's say that we've got the customer success team also wanting to take a look at some of these accounts. So we've got the new accounts in, sales is doing their thing. They're reaching out to new customers. That's all great because we've been pushing those into Salesforce. I can go in here and add some additional fields without recreating the sync. So let me add a couple of additional metrics, and that's the one I want. Let's do, that should be new. That should be save, add and delete. And this one is last event, I believe. Yep, that's the one. Great, so I'm gonna add these new fields to my sync. I get that quick summary again. And the sync is gonna run, and it's gonna add those additional fields. It's gonna, in this case, go back and update all of those additional fields. If you change, as I mentioned, the definition of that metric, that's going to sync as well. You don't even have to come in here and add additional fields. And you can see in sync history as well our sort of log of all of the different runs that we ran. So there's 70 records. We'll get another 70 records as this completes here. Salesforce can sometimes be finicky. There's all sorts of specialization in terms of like validation and whatnot. If, for example, one of those fields had validation that rejected nulls or something, you would see skipped records here as well. So that means that, anybody on the sales operations side can dive in here and see, hey, why isn't that data flowing without having to dive into the logs or that sort of thing. It's all associated right here. And because all of those data points are being pushed into the native fields on Salesforce, they're not in an iframe or some special app or something like that. That means that you can leverage all of the native functionality inside Salesforce or inside of those tools, whether that's triggers or flows or special reports, right? So in this case, I can take those metrics build a really basic Salesforce report and just add a really, really simple definition of what does a healthy customer look like. And suddenly I've got a nice CSM workflow built inside Salesforce. All of these metrics are available to everybody on both teams, and they're running in lockstep with the data warehouse. So if I change the definition on the data warehouse side, that gets propagated here, sales sees it, CSM sees it, and away we go. So that's my planned demo. Like I said, I really do want to get into what everybody is interested in, what everybody is doing, just to sort of like wrap things up, give you a sense of the types of use cases we are seeing. It's not just sales, it's not just customer success. We're seeing a lot of interesting things on the support side, more on advertising. We're just in the process of launching a Stripe integration, which in my mind kind of takes us complete from the very beginning to the very end of a customer journey. But anything on the marketing automation, sales, SDR, those are all integrations that either we have or we're really interested in building for you guys. So I've talked a lot. I don't like talking a lot. I will pause. Let's I'll open it up to any questions.
Hey, Sean.
Hi, Sean. You can go first.
Yeah, no, awesome demo. Works just like it should. Nobody likes a live demo, so congrats at that. I gotta say my favorite thing about it was one of your companies was called DogShare, and I was just kind of thinking about what DogShare would be as a business. But
I think that's that's our plan B if this doesn't work out.
Awesome. So yeah, no, this is awesome. I work in growth, so really trying to apply data to the data as the offense thing is really core to me. And I told Sil that I was hoping that you guys would make the LinkedIn ads audience builder. I don't know if you guys are building that, but very cool if you do. Oh, sorry, go on.
I was going to say I got that request from somebody else yesterday, so it's top of mind for me.
Awesome.
I mean, yes. So we can chat later, but I'm interested in this case.
No worries. So I was just kind of curious, just if there's any stories that you were like really tangible stories from your customers that you thought were particularly tangible, or that kind of unblocked some type of growth that just something more specific than, obviously the tool is cool if it works as you say it does. I'm just more curious of like how people are using it specifically.
Sure. Yeah. So let me talk about a couple of those. So one of our very first customers was actually Figma, and Figma is a really interesting company. For those of you who aren't familiar, it's a primarily web-based design tool. So it's something that you can sign up to for free and start doing, UI design, web design. Their whole growth mechanism has been driven on this idea that an individual, you don't have to pay for it. You can start using Figma, and you can add members of your team over time. And so for a very, very long time, maybe still today, they did essentially no marketing. It was really just driven on somebody on the design team finding the product, really liking it, starting to do work there, adding more members to the design team, adding more people that they were collaborating with, starting to add engineering and product management and that sort of thing, so that you were kind of building up the company organically. And then eventually the hope was for them, you would switch over to, hey, you've got enough of the company in there, you should actually sort of be on a Figma business product, and away you go. That eventual piece was sort of one of those, like, this is great in theory, and certainly it does happen, but as they were growing, as they were scaling, they really wanted to start building out a sales team that would go after those organic customers. And so they started doing that. They started hiring a sales team. They hired a new VP of sales. And there was this big disconnect right at the start of, great, we have all this organic usage. We know people are doing things in the product. They're actually going in and swiping their credit cards. But from a sales perspective, we don't know who to target. And actually, we have the sort of like the really good problem that you would have at a startup, right? Which is like, there's so many to target. Where do we start? Who do we start with first? And so they started in a world where, great, we've got Mode, we've got a data warehouse, let's start building some of these tables, and we'll come up with a report that we can then spit out and give to the sales team to use. But what they found was that if it's not in those tools, if it's not in Salesforce, then it really doesn't get used. And we found this over and over again, right? Like really well-meaning data teams are doing a ton to pull all that data together, build really interesting reports, but an individual account rep, if it's not in their list of like, these are the leads I go after today, they're not necessarily going back. And so that extends to both like data analysis and reporting, but also like a lot of times, you know, an account may be looking at Disney, and in order to figure out how much Disney is using Figma, they would have to switch into some admin tool, and they're switching into Mode, and it just doesn't get done. It doesn't get used. So what they ended up building with Census was two things. One is, for every individual domain that we have in Figma, let's copy those into Salesforce and actually put usage metrics on them. So people that own those accounts on the Salesforce side actually get that context of what is happening. Are they using features? Are they adopting new beta features? Are they using some of the higher end security features that usually indicate that they're like an enterprise customer? And then from there, they were able to start doing prioritization based on that metric. So they started building out sort of a product qualified score on top of that. But their first big win from their perspective was kind of not that crazy from a like analysis or data science perspective. It was really just, tell me what this customer is doing. And that existed in a bunch of different tools before, but putting it in one place was really the interesting deal breaker there. So that's one. Just to give you a sort of like a random smattering of other ones, Clearbit is one of our customers. They're using that continuous sync that I mentioned. They're using continuous to send sign-up events through to customer IO, which is great and is actually, you know, not that hard. But their really interesting thing that they do is they push that event into their data warehouse first, and then they join it with data coming out of Salesforce. So that means that they can actually send the welcome email from the account rep associated with that account, where that's coming through Salesforce. So it's one of these like very interesting, like, hey, I've got two different data sources. I want to enrich basically this event with more context that I know I have in my data warehouse before it eventually makes it to the email marketing tool that is going to send that email off. So that's another potential use case. Cool. Did I scratch the itch for you? Were you interested in any other ones?
Yeah, no, I have other questions, but I'd like to allow others to jump in, so I don't
Sure.
take up all the space.
Ian, I think you had a question.
Yeah, I did. Thanks, John. I had one more tactical question, and then one that's like a bit of a step back. But the tactical question is, so you can overwrite fields, let's say, in Salesforce with this, right? So how do you design around situations where, you know, like you write something from the warehouse and then the account rep is like, oh, actually, this is wrong. Like this is, you know, this is what the value should be. Then they update it in Salesforce and it might just get overwritten again.
Yeah, so it really depends on the intention of that field. Obviously, Salesforce gives you lots of control over who can update that field and that sort of thing. But as default, as I've got this set up here, Census is going to send a new value of new canvas anytime it sees that field change, right? But if you wanted to, for some reason, allow one of the sales reps to go in and override that field, we give you a little bit of control here where we say, like, don't overwrite the existing values, and Census won't try and overwrite that value at that point. So once there's a value there, Census won't try and send things again. So that does give you a little bit of control over, hey, a rep may want to update one of these fields. Say, like we see this all the time. If you've got like first name and last name on contact, if you have it from the database, you want to send that over. But obviously, somebody on the sales side may actually talk with that person and have the right answer. So that's where we would see something like that come in.
Got it.
I'm still screen sharing, right? You can still see what I'm
yeah,
showing
we can
off
see
here.
that. Yep.
Okay, perfect.
Thanks. And the other question was this solution to me, it seems like it moves some of the focus from like traditionally ops teams to analytics teams, right? Because it places a lot of emphasis on the warehouse as a single source of truth, right? Whereas in a lot of companies I work with, like the marketing automation system is a single source of truth because it has like all of the leads and contacts and all of that, and right, like ops teams are in there building like workflows and all of that. Is that like a shift that you've seen in the customers that adopt Census, right? Like instead of an additional ops headcount who knows like Marketo workflows, you may instead add like an analytics headcount, right? That's writing SQL, because then it goes back into Marketo and it goes in Salesforce and like all these other places.
That's a really interesting question. We do see a little bit of that shift, to be honest, a little bit more of analytics and the emphasis on data. I would say that it's not necessarily that it's a shift in headcount, though. Oftentimes what we see is that the ops side ends up having more of that skill set on that team as well. So it's a little bit more of a choosing what that central source of truth is. Like you said, like oftentimes it's a marketing platform, or maybe it's Salesforce with the CRM, and it's pushing that to something more centralized, especially as now we have all of these different data sources coming in. But I would say that is definitely not diminishing the importance of the ops team. It just tends to pull them a little bit more towards data with our customers. Does that difference make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think that's like a very interesting thought. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point, because we do think about it a lot. There's certainly data teams out there that are trying to build up more of that central source of truth and vend that out. That's definitely the case. But if I look at our customer base right now, most of the like initial conversations for looking at Census are still being brought in by the ops team. Somebody on the ops side that's, been told, hey, we've got a bunch of leads in the database. Why can't we market to them yet? Or why don't we have these data points to potentially do personalization or targeting? And so more often than not, it's an ops use case. It's just an ops use case that tends to focus around data. So when we're doing kind of a new customer deployment, there's usually both sides of that in the room.
Yeah, I mean, I think the partnership totally makes sense there. Right? Like one of the things that I was thinking of as you were doing demos, like, oh, does this mean that, on the analytics team, we're going to have more and more ops responsibilities?
I think yes. Like I think honestly, in having a lot of conversations with the data teams, there's almost an appetite for that. Like we've seen a lot of folks that are, they've spent a lot of time building out a data warehouse, building out Mode or Looker and the reports associated with it, but maybe not necessarily getting the business value out of it that they were really hoping for. And so like being able to take that and plug that into the CRM or plug it into the sales team or customer success actually gives a whole new way of providing value out of that existing investment, right? Like it's not like you have to retool the whole data stack. It's really just reusing that and using it in a new way. So a lot of times we see it as kind of data is important, but it hasn't been leveraged as much as it potentially should. And we can help with that.
Gotcha. Thank you, Sean.
Any other questions?
Yeah, that largely answered my question. I had, I just to be a little bit more specific on it, how do you see the lines being drawn between kind of that that more ops focused person where it seems like the analysts are managing DBT and grooming the data. And then there's the person who's really kind of skewing to the operational side. And there's a pretty standard kind of handoff there, or do they basically work together throughout the whole chain?
I would say the handoff tends to happen around these published tables. That tends to be kind of the interface between the two loosely. And this as an output is pretty collaborative, right? Like, so this is where, you know, if somebody on the sales operations side are looking for a specific campaign is going to have requests for particular data points or features, it's ultimately going to show up here. So this is where a lot of that like bridge between the two teams does happen. But I would say most of the DBT grooming, as you said, is largely still a purview of the data team, with maybe somebody for the sales operations side, if they happen to have that SQL skill set, getting involved, working on it. It's certainly between us and DBT and you know, a lot of the companies out there who we want to make that less scary over time. That's the intention. And then the sales operations side is still really enabling the individual, you know, account executives that are using using the tools, using the data. They're the ones looking at building any sort of that marketing automation, the actual campaigns, any of the triggers and workflows on the Salesforce side, but still very largely on their side. I would say I don't know a lot of data teams that have that skill set as part of theirs, and they're sort of reaching all the way up. So from our perspective, like I said, most of our customers have both of those personas in the room, and they would be kind of collaborating on something loosely here.
And that's a benefit.
It's a really interesting line of questioning, though. Yeah, we think about it a lot, and honestly, it doesn't usually come up as people's concerns. So this is cool.
Oh, I mean, also any tool that allows people in different parts with different concerns around the data to collaborate. I mean, that is a huge win, right? There's just voids everywhere when it comes to data, which made me forget my next question.
I mean, I completely agree with you. Connor, do you have a question? I think you may be muted. But not in the Zoom mute of way. I mean, it wouldn't be a Zoom call if we didn't spend time debugging AV.
No, it's a headset not plugged in.
Oh, all right. Did you try plugging it in?
I've only had to do it recently. I just upgraded the operating system, and now I seem to have to plug in a headset. Anyway, quick question. I get what you're
Sure.
offering. I saw it described as a reverse 5-tran. But also I think I saw something describing it as a synchronized tool. But I get that reverse 5-tran, what for 5-tran is the output, for you it's the input, and vice versa to a certain extent.
That's exactly right. Yeah, I would say But
in terms of inputs, so what data warehouses are you currently supporting?
So we plug in with Snowflake, BigQuery, Redshift, and we'll talk with Postgres as well.
Okay.
Honestly, anything that speaks SQL is a potential source for us. But I would say those are like by far the most popular ones that we work with.
Okay, and not only are they your inputs, but your software is actually running in those warehouses.
So our queries, you can kind of think of the data warehouse as also like a runtime, right? Yep. So it's executing SQL. And so our queries to do diffing and track state and that sort of thing are running on your data warehouse. So we'll connect, I can show you that here. We'll connect to a data warehouse with a standard sort of query string type of connection. But our software is still running on our servers. It's just the data and all of the data munging and diffing is happening in your data warehouse.
Yeah, Okay. And in terms of the warehouses that you support, I guess you're following the market. I guess you're, as customers come request something, you weigh it up, and if you think it's got legs, if you think it's not going to be a completely weird request, you're going to start looking at it and adding it to what you're offering. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So if there's data warehouses, is there one that you're particularly interested in?
No, I'm just asking from a very general point of view.
Yep. Yeah. So that's certainly how we build our integrations. Is really, we like to do it around customer use cases. Data warehouses are a little bit more generic, right? So if we wanted to do, say, like an Azure one, which I'm sure we will do sooner or later, that's going to be relatively straightforward for us. From a services perspective, so this is the kind of menu of services. And like I said, we're really focused on tools that touch the customer journey. So everything from the advertising end, hopefully LinkedIn ads soon, all the way to Stripe on the finance side. Those are integrations that we're interested in. But I would say we like to do those with a particular customer in mind, because oftentimes, like I mentioned, how you're going to use HubSpot might be a little bit different than how you may use a CRM, because HubSpot happens to have some marketing automation built into it and chat and that sort of thing. So we're very interested in building more. It really doesn't take us much time at all to build these integrations. And we get a lot of interest and excitement even from our existing customers when we do. But we do like to do them in tandem with a customer use case, just to make sure that we're really nailing down exactly how you want to use it.
And I just wondered as well, some of these, some of the Fivetran type applications, they're charged by volume. So
sure.
I just wondered, so in effect, you've got like a complete loop. So sort of Salesforce could be going through Fivetran to a warehouse, going through Census back to Salesforce. So could there be a situation where the updates that you're making then kind of triggers this like perpetual update, or is there any sort of downside there?
I would say so. In terms of like Fivetran's pricing model, it is based on volume, but it's based on records as opposed to individual updates on those records, right? And so you'd have to work pretty hard to end up in a loop where the combination was creating a ton of records. Certainly, it's theoretically possible that you can create like an infinite update loop. We haven't run into that in the wild, and sort of there's a little bit of like forethought in when you're designing those loops and what actually gets updated. That usually takes care of that. But also, I would say there's a little bit of an asymmetry to that stack that I showed here in my slides. This one, I think there's a little bit of natural asymmetry to this, which is the data sources on the left. There tends to be a lot more of those than the ones on the right. So the Salesforce, Gainsight, the things that you're pushing data out to tend to be a little bit more focused on, hey, this is a small set of tools. Not everything needs all of the data. These are the things that need to take particular actions. The left tends to be a, the more the merrier type of input situation. And so I think that actually helps that problem that you were alluding to of the actual data that you're sending out isn't really carte blanche everything that's coming in. It's kind of baked. It's one that's run through your DBT model, and it's really only sort of the set of data points that somebody on the sales team or somebody on the marketing team can do things with.
Okay, and I guess in the same way that you're sort of watching the market for what warehouses, you're also watching the market for what outputs, and you're generally focused on customer data. Yeah. Okay.
Yep. That's exactly right.
And I guess really, I just think of the general market. I guess in some ways, because you're specializing in, I just wondered, is it possible that there would be a generic tool that would handle both directions? Or
sure.
Is in a way, or have you got the kind of jump on them because you're you're specializing in dealing with certain inputs, dealing with certain outputs?
We definitely benefit from the fact that we're only working on customers. Like that is the sort of object that we care about the most, that we're really focused on the customer journey. We're very close friends with the Fivetran team. We work with them very closely. We talk with a lot of customers together. And honestly, they're different technical problems to solve, even though, like you said at the beginning, a really high level way to pitch it is reverse Fivetran. Ultimately, when we're dealing with a bunch of customers' APIs to push data in, we're trying to solve a pretty different type of problem than they are. So we love to work together with them, but I think it's a little while before we build a Fivetran competitor. We really like to point to them as the right way to do it. They're just way better at it than we are.
And in terms of, do you have, I mean, how much have you got the market to yourselves at the minute, or do you have any competitors? Or I wondered, are Segment doing something like this, or RudderStack, are any of those doing something like this?
With Segment, I mean, you can kind of think about Census as providing some of the similar value, right? Like Segment, the whole idea is that you have a data point coming in to your app, and you want to push it all the way through to, a lot of the icons that I'm looking at here, right? The MailChimp, Salesforce, and Desk, they certainly do a lot of the same things. I think the big difference for us, and what we think is actually a really critical point, is Segment doesn't put your data warehouse in the middle of that. And we think that's the right way to build these data stacks long-term, is to actually pull all that data into a central place, to transform it using something like dbt, and then to deploy the results back out. And it's that transform step that is the really interesting and powerful piece that the data warehouse enables. So I mean, Segment definitely comes up as a potential competitor. I would say like a lot of our existing customers also use Segment, but they're not getting that transform piece out of Segment. What they really like is using dbt to do that, and then using Census to deploy the results. In terms of direct competitors, we hear from a lot of our customers that there's just not really that many people doing this yet. I don't have any illusions that we'll be alone forever, but I think at the moment we've kind of got the jump.
Okay, thanks.
We're using we're hacking a solution with a quote unquote competitor, and I'm not going to name them just because that wouldn't be fair to this.
No. Well, okay. Send me a note afterwards, because
I mean, frankly, this, like, the big upsides here is that this is what it's built to do. Obviously, you have the diffing capabilities and have some transparency into when records were created. If I were to ask that question of the pipeline we have, it is it's a very Wild West way of doing it. So I remember the question. Also remember the joke when you compare it to Fivetran. My Roy, who's also on this call, I slacked. It sounds like reverse Fivetran, and then I just replied to him LTE, and he's like, "No, man, it's not." It's bad joke, right, audience? So I'm kind of curious about what the tools relationship and the uses, the relationship between, like you mentioned, Mode as a kind of a second interface here. How are people using it? Are they using them together? Are they, I guess, how are they thinking about this, the relationship there?
Sure. So usually what we see on Mode is that you're still using that you're using Mode or Looker or Sisense Periscope. You're still using that for ultimately the dashboarding use cases, right? So if you're putting together kind of the executive board of this is how our growth metrics and cohorting and that sort of thing are looking over time, that's not going anywhere. Those tools are great for it. There's some new ones coming out that are shiny and hip SaaS, but it's ultimately those tools are still sitting there. What we're seeing with projects like dbt and Dataform and that sort of thing is some of the kind of data cleanup and modeling that would have happened in those tools before are now kind of being pulled back into the data warehouse. So like LookML on the Looker side of things, it was really built to solve this. And we're now seeing with dbt, some of that getting re-centralized back into the data warehouse. And that's great. It's great for us because that means that in that publish table step, Census can take a look at the same data that that report is using, but the report is going to use it in a very aggregated view, right? Like they're going to say, this is the, you know, the cohorted health of my entire customer base over the last, you know, 90 days worth of signups. Whereas from like a Salesforce perspective, I really want to see what is this individual customer doing at this time, or maybe over some historical, but I'm looking at a per customer level. The benefit of putting that all in the data warehouse is it can be all driven off the exact same models. And so that's what I would say is sort of the shift that's happening now. It's certainly not that Looker and Mode and those tools are going away. They're from a dashboarding perspective, those are still present. It's really more of the sort of thinking about the modeling as that coming back to the data warehouse.
I'm also curious. I mean, so we're really following that same use case of scoring product PQLs, right? And pushing that back to the spot in Salesforce. I'm curious if you have anybody doing any more sophisticated type of machine learning models that then get back to the data warehouse that get fed through Census, or can you think that? Because ours is really, really unsophisticated. It's basically just, you know, a multiplier based on, you know, a handful of different events, but.
Totally. I would say most of what we see is that. In terms of like the scoring, we talk a lot about that being the end goal. And I think the nice thing about the ecosystem is that supports that, but just being completely transparent, we're not seeing a lot of people to that level of sophistication yet. We do think that's the right way to go, right? Like a lot of our customers have what you're describing, sort of the weighted average of scores in order to do PQL, and that's a really great starting point. There's also kind of the mad kudos of the world that are like the black box scoring tools that are going to do that AI for you and do a lot of the scoring that we talk about, but not necessarily in a way where you can introspect or improve over time. We think the ML that you control, the analysts that you control is the right long-term bet, but you know, not every company can afford to have the machine learning specialist to build those models yet. I'm really excited to start talking with customers that do, but I would say we don't see that very often today.
Makes sense. I mean, you guys it's like 2 years the product's been around, or?
Yeah.
I think also, Caitlin, kind of goes back to the conversation about like last week was kind of lean AI, lean machine learning, and this does really feel like that lean version of an ultimate future where you get to go the last 20% with your modeling and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
See,
and as far as
I should have joined the community before.
Getting those back in, dbt has a bunch of really good like meetup talks where folks are running machine learning models and bringing them back in to their data warehouse and then sort of working from there. So I can share a link to at least one of those as well.
Yeah, I think it's a really fascinating use case. We'd love to see more of that. I think there's a huge opportunity for that here. All right. Any other questions? Well, you can always shoot me an email. I'm Sean@getcensus.com. I'm Sean Lynch on Twitter. I would love to nerd out and talk more about this at any point, and hopefully soon I'll be seeing you in Locally Optimistic.
This has been really great. Thank you so much, Sean. I really appreciate you taking the time, and thanks for everybody else who took the time and asked awesome questions.
Yeah, really appreciate the discussion.